This time on BRM TV, a model colliery based on a Stevenson prototype in Durham, plus Phil Parker talks track, and I weather a building for Runcorn Salt. Let's get started.
I'm John Cook. This is my layout. This is based on my childhood memories of a Hetton Colliery railway, which we used to play on. No fences, nothing like that, and people used it as a thoroughfare. The Hetton Colliery Railway was built in 1822. It was the first purpose-made railway to use steam, stationary and locomotive engines and inclines. It was designed by George Stevenson and it was built by his brother Robert. This was 3 years before he took on the Stockton and Darlton Railway. The Hetton Colliery Railway was the first colliery to be sunk through the limestone in the east coast of Durham, and it proved that there was good quality coal under the stone, and that opened up all the huge collieries out of the Durham coastline. The collieries were 8 miles from the River Wear, and the company decided to build its own railway from there, and it went 1.5 miles on the flat from the collieries, and then 2 miles virtually up to the top of Wardenlaw, the highest point in the area, with rope inclines, and then 4 self-acting inclines down to the North Moor beside Sunderland, and then locomotive haul down to the Staithes at Sunderland the coal was shipped down to London. The headgear, I have the blueprint drawings they were for Walker Colliery. They were built by a company called the Grange Iron Works in Durham. They were there from 1866 to 1926, and they sent stuff all over the world. From the drawings, I scaled it down to 00, and the headgear is made out of plastruct and brass wire. I've always been interested in industrial railways from my childhood, and I built the headgear of both shafts about 30 years ago, but I didn't have the space to build a layout. I took over a new house, and my garage was large enough to build this. So I built it in about 2006. I started with the 2 buildings. I have the original drawings for the downcast shaft, and I built that out of plastruct and card. And I've always wanted to build an industrial railway because this was my playground as a child in the 50s and 60s. Those are the workshops for the colliery. Every colliery had its workshops, blacksmiths, joiners, electricians and what have you. And also they had a stockyard for materials for underground and for the colliery system. And that's the workshops system there. Some of the road vehicles are proprietary kits and what have you. My son actually did all of the transport, version model, weathered and what have you, based on real actual transport. Basically tidies the model, the kit up, and then paints it in the correct colour and he thinks it's right, installs additional wing mirrors, windscreen wipers, things like that, which don't normally come with a kit. The town scene's a typical colliery village where you had your library, your working men's club, and your local shops providing everything that was needed. Fairly self-sufficient. So everything was there for what the miners and the people living in the area required. The back scene is just purely photographs. That far end is New Brantsmouth Colliery, or the valley, which was a colliery village. The middle piece is Ushamoo, which is the other side of the valley. That was another colliery. And the far piece is the Harrington area. And as you can see, there's Pensham Monument, which is a famous landmark in County Durham.
Let's talk about track today. This is a nice standard 00 track, and as you can see, it's got nickel silver rails and plastic sleepers. The thing is, it all comes in yard lengths generally. If you're buying flexi track, it's going to come in a yard length, and that seems to be how track is always sold in the UK. Pico, Hornby, they all do it in yard lengths. So, unless your layout is specifically designed around yard lengths of flexible track, you're going to have to find a way of cutting it. So a quick look at the track itself. The rails are a specific height, and that's denoted by the code. So in this case, this is code 75 track, which is a fairly fine scale rail height. Code 100 is a little bulkier and more appropriate for mainline model railways. You get up to much larger codes, 200-300 for garden railway style track. Basically, the bigger the number, the fatter the rail you're going to deal with. Underneath, the sleepers are plastic, and they're held apart with what we call webs, little bits of plastic. And with flexi track, some of these webs are cut through, so you can bend the rail and you can see that the webs either close up or open out depending on how far you've bent it. The thing is, when you bend the rail, the outside rail is much shorter effectively than the inside rail, so you're going to have to cut the inside rail to get a nice clean joint at the end of the track. And so that's what I'm going to look at today. This is my micro baseboard. As you can see, it is literally just a length of track pinned to a piece of wood. It's not completely useless. I could use this as part of a sort of photo plank, or perhaps I could varnish the wood and make it something nice for a locomotive to stand on. What it does have is it has track overhanging the ends. So let's look at how we can cut that back. First thing to look at is the wrong tool. This is a junior hacksaw, and it is very much the wrong tool for doing this, because the teeth, even though they're quite fine, are still fairly large compared to the rail size, and the chances are it's going to catch and drag the rail around. Now the rail is only held into place with little plastic rail chairs, so once the rail's pulled with any hardness, those rail chairs are going to pop, they're going to break, and you're never going to be able to fix them again. Sometimes you can bodge it with a bit of glue, but the truth is the track's never quite the same. So you need to use the right tool for the job. If you want to use a saw, you're looking at something like one of these little X-Acto saws. You see these at the trade for model railway shows all the time, different length, different depth blades. They all generally fit the same sort of handle, and you're looking for the finest teeth you can possibly get your paws on. All you do is just put your finger against it there, carefully saw away, and you can see, because the teeth are very small, there's not much side pressure on the rail, and so the rail chairs should survive, and your track will still be just as strong as it was before you attacked it with a cutting tool. I do tend to put my finger quite hard on the rail itself, just to make sure it's got that little bit of extra support. The blade itself, very fine, and you shouldn't have any problem working there. Okay, there we are, and we're through the rail. So far, so manual. That is a great tool, and you'll do a few rails quite happily with that one. But for speed, I prefer a set of these. These are Xuron track cutting clippers. They're about £16 at a show, and they are specifically designed for this job. They're very, very clever. They're designed, the way the blades come together means that they will last quite a long time, but they've got a flat edge there and the non-flat edge. And if you clip the track with the flat edge, and before I do that, safety note, put on some eye protection because there are going to be bits of stuff flying off all over the place. Safety note, just clip off the track there, and I'll just finish the job there. And what I've got is I've got a nice clean track end, really, really nice clean cut. I don't really need to do anything with that. So these are especially good if you've got your 1 yard length of flexi and you just need to trim it roughly to length. But if you can get at it, and you do need to be able to get, certainly pushed quite hard down into the sleeper, these are great, and you will get a really nice clean edge there. If you don't get quite the clean edge you want, I do say have a small file kicking around, because the really important thing is you don't want to burr. If you've got a little burr at the end of the track there, and this especially happens if you've been sawing it, the trains will bump as they find that little bit of metal. So I tend just to chamfer off the edges just at the joint, and that should ensure that the train runs from a piece of track here onto a new piece of track without any bumping. But this isn't the only time you want to cut track. Sometimes you just want to cut one rail, because if you want to isolate, say, this end of this track from that end of that track, if you put a cut in that rail there, then the electricity can't flow from one to the other. You could put a switch between wired to either side of the cut, and that means you can switch on the power into one length of track. But it does mean you've got to put a cut in the middle there. Now, you can sometimes get in with the saw, but that's a little tricky, because you can actually see here that to get a good angle on it, I've got to go through the baseboard. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to cut through the baseboard. So what I need is a different tool, and the tool for that is a slitting disc. This is a carbodium disc that fits into a little mandrel here and into a power tool. Turn the power tool on. This is the sound, if I'm honest, of most model railway clubs as people are cutting away and attacking the track. This is a very, very useful tool, but these blades, whilst they're not actually sharp, what they're going to do is grind through the track. What they are is fragile. Bits of blade will fly off. They just will. It doesn't matter what you do. You're going to occasionally they break, and bits of blade fly off. And so definitely some eye protection on there. And I know some of you are going, well, I'm wearing glasses anyway. Eye protection is still really important. If you're thinking yourself, well, don't need it, just think about the price of your glasses and if they get a scratch on them. These things are about £1.36, I think I paid for these at a builder's merchant. So easy to get hold of. Anyway, be a bit careful with the tool. Turn the cutter on and carefully place it onto the track. There we are, job done. Straight through the track. Now the downside of this is that is actually quite a big cut there. It's probably about 1.5 millimetres wide, but that doesn't usually seem to bother certainly 00 trains, and I've found actually with the finer scale stuff it doesn't seem to worry it too much either. Just make sure that the rail is supported both sides of the joint with good strong track chairs, and you'll be fine. And you can be cutting away with this stuff to your heart's content. I'll just trim the ends of this here. There we go. There we go. And I didn't have the tool all the way up. Trimmed off nicely. This is an area where I definitely will want to trim the burrs down, and also on here just feel along the track to make sure there's no burr. There isn't one, and I'd rather not file on top of the rail because it just puts scratches in place that can hold dirt. So there we have it. Cutting track is really simple. It's something we're going to do all the time, but it's really simple as long as you've got the right tools for the job. Pick your tool and off you go.
In this issue of BRM, we're looking at the buildings on Runcorn Salt Union, and here on this segment of BRM TV, I'm going to show you how I weathered this building using these 3 products, a little cotton bud and 3 brushes. Let's get started. We're going to look at using some of the Life Colour washes today. This is Road Dust LPW12. I'm going to introduce a little bit of this down the side of the windows. Windows are white. This is a slightly sort of, well, you can see it's a bit of a cream colour there. If we start weathering this with something black, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. And it's an office block. I think the chances are that it would have been cleaned every once in a while for the staff to see out of the windows. So let's not go overboard with colours. So some of the cream, and then I've also got this other one to test, which is LPW11 Rain Marks. Now this is a whiter colour. Just see if I take the top off there. These are very, very dilute washes. I mean, these are actually ideal consistency for putting through an airbrush, as they are if you wanted to do that. But I'm just going to use a little brush because I want to highlight some of the areas of the brickwork. For instance, around the windows where we might have a little bit of, dust and accumulation and grime just dripping down the sills there. So let's get started with a brush. I'm going to get applying these, and then we'll have a look and see what we can do with the roof. Life Colour washes are pre-diluted acrylics that can be airbrushed or brushed as I'm demonstrating. Work methodically and imagine where dirt and dust would accumulate across sills and down panes. Okay, so that's the road dust applied. All I need to do now is look at some of the rain marks. So the rain marks, because it's a white wash, we're not going to see this over the white of the building. So that's why we need to use the white over the brick areas. So the same process applies again, just dunk the brush in. It's a very small brush this. This is Life Colours 591. It's a 000 brush. And all we need to do is just, in the corners there, gently work down where the rain would wash some of the debris off the windows, because the chances are at this period of time the windows, the frames of them are still wooden, so all the paint from the wood is going to wash off gradually down the sides of the building, unlike UPVC windows that we see today. Subtlety really is key, and the beauty is because it's a wash and it's paint, if you make a mistake you can just grab yourself a little cotton bud and just remove any you need from the particular area concerned. So that's that side done. The other side doesn't have any windows. There's a few more at the end here. I'm not going to overdo these because these have got yellow sills on them. And there we go. Now one of the other areas that I thought I'd perhaps have a look at is the roof. And as you'd expect, it's a mid-century building, it's a flat roof. Phil built this using a bit of masking tape, which he's layered up and then painted on the top. It is unsticking a little bit at the edges, but I can resolve that later when it comes to adding the guttering. But for the roof itself, he's painted it this sort of matte black colour. There is still a little bit of a sheen on it, so we can try to address that. But one of the things that I thought would be quite nice to add visual interest to the eye is adding a little bit of patchiness. And I'm going to do that using a wash. This is a Humbrol black wash. Let's give it a bit of a shake there. And this can be easily applied just in some areas where over time a flat roof like this is never perfectly flat, and you get some areas where there's some puddles that accumulate over time. So just take the top off there. And I'm going to use a slightly larger brush this time. This is a Humbrol Evoco brush. So I'm just going to apply this in some patchy areas on the roof. And when you're applying this, there's no need to apply it very evenly. Just be haphazard. If it's a bit like a leopard, you're going to end up with some weird effect, or if it looks too even, it just won't look right. So maybe you've got a bit in the corner here. The more levels and layers that you put on top of each other, the darker it will transform the top of the building. what you've got to always think about when you're making a layout is which areas are you, or a person that's approaching your layout, a visitor at an exhibition or something like that, which areas are they going to see the most of? And if there's anything that you can do to enhance those areas over, say, an area that isn't as visible, that's always worthwhile doing first. The smaller details, things like the side of the building, most of the time you're not going to see that when you're looking down on the layout. It's only when you're down at sort of eye level on the track that you'll actually notice those details. So focus on things like roofs, which are often neglected on layouts, on the roads, on scenery, things like that, the grass, the areas that cover most of your layout, and little trackside details and doors and things. You can always enhance those later on. Okay, so with that now applied, I think it's time to look at some of the areas around the bottom of the building. And this is where you're going to get dust from traffic and the wind obviously blowing against the building. So I'm going to go with some, let's see, South Europe dust. That should do the trick. This is another life colour pigment. This is PG 113. Again, we can just apply this with a little brush, but very, very carefully, because one thing with weathering powders is that you can easily overdo them, especially with a colour like this on brick. You don't want to have much of it going on there at all. So start off at the bottom and don't overdo it, but just, you can see that start to accumulate at the bottom of the building. Now, this is something that you should ideally do when your building's planted on your layout, but obviously I can't do that because I'm demonstrating that for you here in the studio. So this panel here, for instance, this can be quite, you can see the difference between the two. It's only subtle, it's around the base there. I know it's there because I've applied it, but if you stand away from it from a distance, you'll start to notice these small details that just make it look a little less clean, like it's actually been there for a long time and aging away. Just look at photographs when you're doing this sort of thing, and if you can try and emulate what you see in a photograph, you can't go far wrong, really. There we go. So I'll just repeat the process around the building, and then we'll catch up and see how it looks.